A lot of characters in One Piece have backs, and a lot of them have stories. So what happens when you use your polymerization card and combine the two? You get stories back. I switched up the order, didn't I? Before we can talk about backstories in One Piece, we should talk about what makes a good backstory in general. To answer this question, I've compiled a list of reasons that I meticulously crafted by, well, using Google. I don't know what you expected from me. Did you think I was actually going to research something? Of course not. The first component of a good backstory is if all the details are relevant. Secondly, the backstory has to in some way influence the characters and their actions, and it should make sense for their backstory to be, well, theirs. For example, if someone's backstory was being a radio show host and them randomly becoming the president of the United States wouldn't make much narrative sense. Alright, what the fuck? A good backstory also manages to be revealed at the perfect time. It shapes up the character's actions, but the backstory is never completely revealed until the perfect moment. Alright, now on to how Oda does all of this and more. Firstly, Oda's backstories almost always have details that are relevant to the story. In most cases, there's no surplus detail that is completely useless. Even during parts of a backstory that don't quite relate to the character at hand, he always manages to sprinkle in new bits of information that are relevant to the story. For example, during Robin's backstory, while a bit of her backstory wasn't actually focused on her, seeing the scholars of O'Hara talk about the ancient kingdom is one of the most important moments in the entire show. Oda doesn't add useless things to backstories just to make them longer. They're almost always concise and only have details that affect the character at hand. Oda's also a master at making backstories that reflect a character. A character's backstory always affects the character in ways that make sense. For example, Robin's fear of the world government was explained by the fact that she had already once experienced a buster call. Because Oda always shows bits and pieces of a character's trauma before actually showing the backstory that created the aforementioned trauma, a character's backstory almost always perfectly fits the character. Another great example of this is Senor Pink, whose backstory perfectly explained is, well, it explained a lot of things. And if you haven't realized yet, the thing I mentioned about Oda showing backstories at perfect times fits into the perfect timing category. He builds up the mystery regarding a character and makes their actions seem very confusing for the previous arcs seem very confusing for us readers, and only at the climax of the hype does he explain their backstory. For example, Robin. Yes, I know I'm bringing her up a lot, but she had a really good backstory, okay? Let me use her. That sounds wrong. Let me use her as an example. Robin's backstory came at the climax of all the hype atop the world government at Enies lobby. Her backstory perfectly showed us why she was so scared of the world government, which finally explained her actions for the entirety of the previous arc. Zoro's backstory followed him adamantly refusing to die, which explained why he wouldn't want to die but was fine with being tied up. Speaking of being tied up with Zoro, what I'm trying to say is that Oda masterfully does everything a backstory should do, but at the same time he also does more because, well, he's Oda. For one, Oda has consistently been able to use backstories as a way to introduce completely new storylines. The most obvious example of this is obviously Robin's backstory, whose backstory literally changed the world of One Piece forever. But branching out from just simping over Robin's backstory and the 10 out of 10 writing that it is, even Luffy's backstory with Ace and Sabo showed us new potential plot lines. Sabo's entire character was completely new at that point, and while at first Oda tried to make him look dead, I think all of us knew he'd eventually come back. Mostly because characters in the show literally never die. I swear to God, Oda, just kill your characters off, please. Kaido's backstory as well, though short in comparison to most backstories, also introduced us to a new storyline through the first few moments where we see King and him in a lab. The Seraphim are built off of the storyline, literally because King's lab experimentation is the only reason they were built. Another example of this is Law's backstory that possibly hinted at new plotlines for Sengoku and around the corruption of the Marines, even though it feels very isolated when compared to any other backstory. Speaking of Law's backstory though, let's talk about another thing Oda does well with his backstories: making us sad. I mean, a lot of backstories in media are sad. Trauma is a great way to build characters, and when handled right, it can lead to some of the greatest characters in all of media. Using trauma as a way to enhance a character building is a common theme in media, but One Piece does it exceptionally well. Most of the show's backstories are extremely sad, and honestly, here's my conspiracy theory, but I think Oda does it for one singular reason: to flex. This man literally writes half of his backstories just to flex that he can write hella emotional moments. I mean, come on, like, we get it, you're a god. Nah, but for real, Oda's backstories are some of the hardest hitting backstories in all of anime. I mean, they're so sad that if Oda's backstories were their own anime, My Hero would no longer be the most depressing thing to watch. Some of the saddest moments in all of anime come from Oda's backstories. Brook's extremely dark backstory, Frankie's heartbreaking loss, and just all of the Straw Hats in general. You know, fuck the One Piece, someone get these guys a therapist. One Piece to me is the king of sad backstories. I mean, in an anime that brands itself as happy and goofy, to be able to have so many 10 out of 10 heartbreaking stories is just insane. Truly proves that depressed people are the funniest. And that's why you should watch me, subscribe, hit the like button. Another thing I love about One Piece's backstories is that Oda gives even the most bizarre characters and things extremely sad backstories. Like, there's no reason for this man to be able to make us cry, yet Oda pulled out a really traumatizing backstory. The random whale we met in the beginning of the story, an absolute heartbreaking backstory. A guy locked in a chest that most people forget the existence of, heartbreaking past. Koala, who doesn't even have a truly important role in the story yet, had one of the darkest and most heartbreaking pasts. Fucking Arlong from chapter 50 had a backstory so much later in Fishman Island that honestly made us feel a bit sad for him. Like, why did Blue Doofenshmirtz had a sad past as well? Okay, that's the end of my rant. One Piece's backstories also make the world feel like an actual world. Throughout backstories and history in general, Oda manages to make the world of One Piece feel like an actual world. Luffy's existence isn't the start of the world. The world of One Piece has been around for hundreds of years before Luffy and will exist hundreds of years after he dies. Through backstories of older characters and even moments that happened way before Luffy was born, Oda creates a feeling of completeness. His world feels whole. Through Odin's backstory, for example, it's clear that before Luffy, there was so much going on. Though the craziest events are happening today, bonkers shit did go down before. Did I just say the word bonkers? Also, even locations in One Piece have backstories, though the preferred term for a location's backstory is, well, history. I prefer to live by the quote, "What is history if not just a collection of backstories?" Someone put that on a t-shirt. That was good. A lot of things in One Piece have stories and history, and I think that adds to the feeling of the world. Well, you know, actually being a world. Overall, though, One Piece has great backstories. Genuinely some of the best I've ever seen. It's unfortunate the same can't be said about their leg stories because, god damn, these people do not do leg day. Overall, though, that's it for me. Thank you.